In the second half of 2020, Panasonic announced a massive firmware update was going to be released for the Panasonic Lumix S1. They said that this firmware update was going to come in the beginning of 2021 and was going to keep the camera ahead of their newly released S5. This firmware had a ton of new features added in the video department, including anamorphics. We recently took a road trip, but we got back on the day that this firmware was released, and the following day was nice and overcast, so Natalie and I went to the Jewel Box here in St. Louis to test the anamorphic modes. Now, one thing right away that I noticed is that the Panasonic S1's anamorphic mode is in Super 35 a 3:2 ratio, whereas my previous experience with the GH5 anamorphic modes was in 4:3 ratio. Now, this is important to note because the S1's anamorphic is in fact wider, not by a ton, but a noticeable amount. Aside from that, the S1's anamorphic modes are fairly restricted at 24 and 30 frames a second, which is fine for me because I don't do a ton of slow-mo and anamorphic. However, it is important to note. The internal disk squeeze option on the S1 that was added in the firmware is actually quite handy and has pretty much all of the squeeze ratios accounted for. You go into the menu and can pick which one your anamorphic lens is, and it will disk squeeze the image for you, which will help you focus and help you with composition. The mode performed fairly well. I shot this in Vlog. I shot all of this in Vlog, put the Vericam nicest LUT, and added a light custom grade in Resolve. If you have the S1, download the firmware. It is fantastic.